Yep. Yep. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for attending today's Interfaith seminar on inclusiveness. Create inclusive environments, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And today we have two guest ministers here, Reverend Candice Shibata, Resident Minister of Buddhist Church of Stockton, and also Reverend Keith Inoue, Senior Pastor of West Los Angeles United Methodist Church. And first, I'd like to ask Reverend Candice Shibata for her presentation.
Thank you. Is this okay like it is? You can hear me okay? Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Reverend Candice Shibata, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I first would like to thank Reverend Takata for this opportunity to, of course, participate as a panelist today at this Interfaith seminar. And I'm also honored to be beside Reverend Keith Inoue, who I first met 8 years ago at my first Interfaith gathering of Buddhist and Christian ministers and members to discuss creating safe spaces in our churches and our temples. So, to be honest, this is actually my first seminar as a presenter on this topic because within these last 8 years, I've actually been an attendee to gatherings such as these, since I too am still learning. However, creating an inclusive environment at my temple where we can celebrate our diversity and our equitable is very important to me. And of course, I want to be able to learn, and what better way than being a participant in a seminar like this. So before I begin, I would also like to express my appreciation to the members of Ichimi of the Gardena Buddhist Church, especially Reverend Inyu Mazu and wife Marie, for their support in my journey, addressing my own unconscious bias, and understanding Amida Buddha's all-inclusive wisdom and compassion for us all. So I'd like to initially share how my journey began of identifying even some of my own unconscious bias of inclusivity in my circle of friends while growing up at the Buddhist Church of Stockton, and how impactful this realization has been since, again, my first Interfaith seminar that I attended 8 years ago. So as I mentioned, I grew up at the Buddhist Church of Stockton. I attended our educational program for children called Dharma School. I played Temple League basketball. I was an active member of the youth programs as a middle schooler and high schooler growing up, which then involved going out of town for conferences, basketball tournaments, and dances that honestly I always looked forward to as a youth. So I was really fortunate to have many friends at the temple, and it was a space where I felt included. I have to admit that the temple was a huge part of my life and a safe space for me, unlike school, where I wasn't sure where I fit in all the time. So most of my social life involved my temple friends, who were mostly all Japanese American kids. So looking back on my experiences at the temple and how accepted I was made me believe that all the girls I grew up with had the same shared experience that I did. We laughed together, had crushes on boys, loved playing basketball, and couldn't wait to go out of town again for these basketball tournaments and conferences. And we were all excited to dance with the boys, right? So in my self-centeredness, I didn't realize that my experience was not the same for all. And I truly failed to recognize that possibly not all of my peers identified as heterosexual, basketball-loving, conference-going, dance-the-night-away kind of teenagers like I did. So this moment of realization, again, came 8 years ago, at 37 years of age, when I learned that this was not the same happy and joyful experience for everyone, and actually created much discomfort for some. And I was moved to tears from shame and sadness to hear the stories of individuals who identify as LGBTQ+, and as they shared their thoughts and feelings regarding activities that I enjoyed at the temple and were actually very uncomfortable and quite confusing for some. And I was blinded by my own ignorance and felt very compelled to apologize for this ignorance in my life to those who shared that afternoon. And again, this was a turning point in my life. And this occurred in the first year of my ministry. And it motivated me to learn more about what it means to be more aware of my own unconscious bias and ignorance, and to create an inclusive environment at the temples that I serve. So before I begin to address this topic from this Jodo Shinshu point of view, I would like to take a brief moment to define the terms pertaining to this seminar on inclusivity. So when I looked up these terms on the internet, it guided me towards Ferris State University, a university that I hadn't even heard of before. But it is a public university with its main campus in Big Rapids, Michigan. And I appreciated that they had detailed definitions that fit this seminar very well. So under the Resources tab, in the Diversity Office section, there were these terms. So they state that diversity is the range of human differences, including but not limited to race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, social class, physical ability or attributes, religious or ethical value system, national origin, and political beliefs. And what is equity? They define equity as being fair and having just practices to ensure access, resources, and opportunities that are provided for all to succeed and grow. Inclusion. Inclusion was defined as involvement and empowerment, where the worth and dignity of all people are recognized. An inclusive university promotes and sustains a sense of belonging. It values and practices respect for the talents and the beliefs, the backgrounds, and ways of living of its members. And they go on to say that belonging is feeling valued, respected, supported, and empowered in your professional, educational, and personal endeavors. So based on all of these definitions alone, I am motivated to create a temple that includes diversity and equity and inclusion, that allows those who wish to encounter the Buddha Dharma to be able to feel safe and to be able to do so, and of course come as they are. So to be honest, I have felt unsure on how I would be accepted during different times in my life, in all areas of my life as well, or maybe all arenas of my life. This uncertainty would make me feel sometimes fearful of how I would be able to create healthy, meaningful relationships with others and feel included amongst my peers. And sometimes I would worry about how, quote-unquote, successful I would be in these different areas of my life. So this includes my professional life as I worked in a law firm, as an office staff worker, at the Sacramento State Events Ticket Office when I was a young college student, as a case manager for infants and toddlers who were experiencing developmental delays, and even as a therapist, as I was interning, and even today as a minister. And I still wonder on occasion, can I be fully accepted as just Candace? With, of course, some expectations from others of how Reverend Shibata should actually act and be. So I wanted to address this sense of fear and acknowledge that I too, again, have fears in my life of being fully accepted. And I want to center these thoughts on a portion from the larger sutra of the Buddha of immeasurable life. So it states, I resolve that when I become a Buddha, I will fulfill this vow in every possible way, and to all beings who live in fear, I will give great peace. So this is taken from the hymn Sambutsuge that all of us probably chant in our Buddhist temples here in the BCA, the Buddhist Churches of America. And in our service book in Stockton, it describes this overview of what Sambutsuge is. And it's verses in which Bodhisattva Dhammakara express their own desire to be a Buddha, to attain Buddhahood, and their heartfelt determination to accomplish this goal for the sake of saving all sentient beings. So with this in mind, and as a minister, I would like everyone who comes to the temple to not be in fear of who they are, to be able to come and be accepted just as they are. And this wish of Bodhisattva Dhammakara encompasses everyone without discrimination. However, as I mentioned earlier, I do realize that we all come with our own karmic conditions of our lives, experiences, and perspectives. But from the Buddhist perspective too, we also come with our own blinding greed and anger and ignorance, which again may blind us from truly seeing and accepting life and others as they truly are. However, the wisdom and compassion of Amida Buddha is like a light that can break through this blindness. So as I mentioned, I'm from Stockton, and from maybe those of you that have been to Stockton or lived in the valley, you know that we suffer from a lot of fog, and it's actually pretty treacherous when driving at times in the valley. And my mentor, Reverend Dr. David Matsumoto, had always used this example of driving in Stockton in the fog. And so even within Venerable Shinran's writing, we talk about this fog and mist and of greed and desire and all of these different things. And despite maybe the fog and mist that's right in front of us, there is still this light that breaks through, maybe gives us a momentary glimpse of some clarity. And this is likened to the light and wisdom and compassion of Amida Buddha. And the founder of Dodo Shinshu Buddhism, Venerable Shinran, writes at length of Amida Buddha's light of wisdom and compassion. And I wanted to share a few passages that really encompass this light in a very beautiful way. So again, despite having my own greed, anger, and ignorance, Venerable Shinran wrote in the Hymns of the Pure Land Masters, "My eyes being hindered by blind passions, I cannot perceive the light that grasps me. Yet the great compassion, without tiring, illumines me always." And so maybe you can imagine this light, this warmth of light. And despite the rainy weather that we've had in Stockton, there were a few days where it was actually quite beautiful and quite sunny. And those types of days, those types of bright light and warm days, makes me think about, again, Amida Buddha's light of wisdom and compassion. And this additional hymns based on gathas and praise of Amida Buddha, Shinran Shonin wrote, "The light of wisdom exceeds all measure, and every finite living being receives this illumination that is like the dawn. So take refuge in Amida, the true and real light." And I could probably go on and on and on regarding these particular hymns that reference light, as I probably wrote a paper in graduate school, because the wording is so beautiful and does really encompass this wisdom and compassion. And so, of course, as human beings, with our own greed and anger and ignorance, quite possibly we may not be able to see and understand our own biases, our own thoughts and feelings that may make an environment and even a temple or a church maybe uncomfortable for some. And so I think the teachings of the Buddha and the wisdom and compassion of Amida Buddha really encourage us to be able to look deep down to understand these biases that we might have, whether they're conscious or unconscious, to be able to think about, to reflect upon what we can do as members of a community, a religious community, and even as a minister, to understand what truly am I doing that makes my space rather uncomfortable or comfortable for my members. And so how do we create this inclusivity and equity at our temples so that all feel safe and able to be their diverse and unique selves? So part of my mission, possibly, of what I can do is to be able to change or address the language in which we use at our temples, to be able to look at books that have been with our temple probably for decades and challenge what they say in regards to gender language, and utilizing more gender neutral or encompassing language that includes everybody. I too have created an ad hoc committee for inclusion to be able to work with Ichimi on a more regular basis, hopefully, to be able to let my members know that they're seen and they're heard, regardless if they might be LGBTQ plus members who are out in our community. And so I think, again, with all of this in mind, and of course, even with my own learning that I still continue to have to do, I am challenged to be able to look at what we are doing and being able to challenge even take these very small steps in making sure that all members of my community at my temple understand, again, what we can do to make our temple a little bit more inclusive for all. So maybe I can pass it over to Reverend Keith so I don't take up too much time, if that's okay as well. But and then question and answer at the end?
Yeah, at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
And I would like to invite Reverend Keith.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Takata and Reverend Candace. It's nice to be here. It's nice to be invited to be a part of this program. And greetings to all of you that are watching online. My name is Keith Eno. I am United Methodist pastor. I have been for the last, coming up on 40 years now, having served churches in Dinuba, so I know Fog, and Torrance and Clovis and San Jose before coming to the West Los Angeles area. And all of those churches that I've served have been, United Methodist churches, but historically Japanese American United Methodist churches. There's several things that I really resonated with when Reverend Candace was speaking. One was, I think our experiences are very similar in terms of our upbringing in the temple or the church. The church or the temple was very much a safe space for us where we felt like we belonged, even though we felt kind of out of sorts in public school or, in other kind of places. And so I too felt that way, that I felt so much freer when I was with church friends. And I also wanted to say I resonate with your saying that, talking about your unconscious biases, because I too know that I've had a lot of unconscious biases, and I'm growing, and even at age 66 at the end of this month, I'm still learning, and I appreciate the learning. So it's a part of life's journey to continue to grow and to be sensitive to others' issues and who they are. Talking about the idea of belongingness in a spiritual community, I think that is so important. The writer James Michener once said, this is the journey, and I'm going to put this in inclusive language, this is the journey that all people must make to find themselves. If they fail in this, it doesn't matter much else what they find. And I really think that's true. I think that a spiritual community or your faith community is a place where you want to understand that at the deepest core of who you are, somehow who you are is okay. And that's who you are, and you're accepted by the divine. And because its connection with the divine, you're a part of a community that grasps to understand who you are and accept you. And so the fact that we're having so many conversations now, whether it's Okairi or other kinds of things, we're learning and growing as faith communities. For me as a Christian pastor, I'm going to talk about all Christians in many ways historically, but then I'll kind of hone into United Methodist, where the United Methodist Church is. So Christianity through the ages has been very harmful to persons who are not heteronormative, right? And I think everybody knows that. I wanted to relay one of my first early experiences of serving at a church in Gardena. And a young man who had been well loved by the congregation. Just everybody loved him. But he asked to meet with me one time, and he said, I said, oh, sure, let's meet. And then he said, when we got together, he said, I wanted to tell you that I'm needing to leave the church. And I said, leave the church? Why? And it's because he said, he says, I have a sexual addiction, he said. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he says, I'm attracted to men, and therefore I understand and know that that's not, the Christian faith doesn't accept that. And he was convinced that it was a state of brokenness, or that he was in, as Christians say, a state of sin. And therefore he felt like he needed to remove himself from the faith community. So my response to him was, well, could it be that you're just a gay man? But he couldn't accept that. He was so convinced that the Christian church, even the church that he felt very warmly welcomed in, our church, he could not be who he felt like was, because he felt he was. He was convinced that he was in a state of sin or brokenness. So I couldn't convince him otherwise to stay in the community, and that convince him that we would gladly welcome and accept him as he is, but he was convinced that he could not be in the church. So he left the church. And it was probably 7 years later, I got an email from him, and he said, Reverend Keith, I finally understood what you were trying to tell me. I found a church, and it was in Central California, to my surprise. He said that it was mostly, I think, gay men or something like that. And he finally realized that, he could accept himself for who he was, his sexual orientation. And I was so overjoyed about that. And I was so glad for him. But I was so sorry that could not happen in our church for him. That it took 7 years for him to kind of come to grips with who he was, and to know that he was okay, and that's who he was. And so that has been my experience in the Christian church. Is I understand historically that the Christian church has done a lot of harm. It's black and white. It's an either-or kind of issue. Even in my own United Methodist denomination, I must say that most all of our Japanese American or historical Japanese American United Methodist churches are in very progressive or liberal conferences. And so all of our churches are what is called reconciling churches. And that means that we are welcoming and affirming of persons who identify themselves as LGBTQ+. I myself have had the pleasure and honor of being able to officiate maybe about 6 same-sex marriages right now. And I got to tell you, those have been the most emotional experiences for me. And the reason why they have is because I see them in their marriage ceremonies surrounded by family and friends who accept them and love them and support them. And it moves me so much. And I'm glad that they feel that they can come back to the church to affirm their love for one another in the context of their understanding of God's grace and love. The Christian church overall has, I say it's been harmful, and it certainly has. But that's not to say it's not changing either. So we find many Christian denominations really becoming more open and affirming and welcoming of LGBTQ persons. The Episcopal Church, the United Church of Christ, the Metropolitan Community Church, Unitarian Universalist, Canadian Unitarian Council. I don't include United Methodists in there, however, because as many of you may know, the United Methodist Church denomination is on the verge of splitting over this very issue of sexual orientation and gender identity. In the United Methodist Church, we're not independent churches that can make up our own decisions about certain issues. We are a connectional system. And therefore, as a kind of democratic system, we gather all of the church pastors and lay leaders together from within each conference, and we make decisions on issues. And then every 4 years, we have what's called General Conference. And at General Conference, it's representatives from all the conferences across the United States and the world, actually. And we decide on matters of what our beliefs are and how we stand on certain issues. So there's a book, I should have brought it, it's called the Book of Discipline, where every 4 years a new version of the Book of Discipline is put together, and all the churches are bound by that. The problem has been that this issue has divided the church. And because of COVID, we have not been able to have a general conference. I want to say maybe it's been like 7-8 years now. I can't remember exactly. It's coming up this year, though. But it's clear that many churches, both conservative and liberal, and I think people would probably rather use more affirming terms like traditionalists, and progressives are really digging in and kind of battling this out. And we have not, as a denomination, voted yet on removing this section of the Book of Discipline which states historically homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. Now, a lot of United Methodist churches are fighting against that, to change the discipline. And I think if you just took a vote in the United States, probably that change would happen. But because we're a global denomination, we have representation from a lot of different other countries that happen to be more traditionalist or conservative, that really kind of skews the vote here in the United States as a connectional kind of decision. However, we do have very progressive United Methodist conferences, and most of our historical Japanese American United Methodist churches are located in more progressive conferences. So even though a pastor is not supposed to be officiating by discipline same-sex marriages, many of our conferences and pastors do in more progressive conferences. There's a level of kind of protection and safeguard for many of us that is not quite evident and so strong in other conferences. But the church is changing, and I think what you're going to see happen in the United Methodist Church is many folks, because General Conference has been postponed, many churches have already left the denomination, and on both ends. And so we'll see where the United Methodist Church stands regarding the Book of Discipline, our Book of Laws, basically. But the truth of the matter is, for most of our historical Japanese American United Methodist churches, we're very welcoming and open and affirming, and many of our pastors are officiating same-sex marriages, and I'm thankful for that. I really am. I do think that our Christian churches, our United Methodist churches, in our Japanese American kind of connection here, it's very clear that we really need to publicize that we are. Some folks in the church may say, well, why can't we just say we're welcoming of everybody? But that doesn't really fly for a lot of people, because they really want to know whether when they come through the doors of the church that they really are welcomed as persons who identify themselves as LGBTQ+. And so you'll notice at our church, just a block up the road here on Purdue, you'll see a rainbow symbol. And you'll see that in many churches, Christian churches now, a rainbow flag or some symbol that represents, will help people to know that they are welcome. And you'll see it in their websites and in their PR. And I, as a pastor of any church that has made that decision to become a reconciling United Methodist Church, that everybody really understands the identity of the church, because one person's insensitive comment can make a person feel like that's the opinion of the whole congregation. And so I really try to impress upon each congregation that I serve that it's so important that you really are public about, the welcome that you extend to people. And LGBTQ persons who identify themselves as LGBTQ are oftentimes really nervous about whether they want to step into a Christian church or not. And so those kinds of things are so vital, I think. Let's see. I think that's probably I really wanted to hear what people's questions were and kind of help to respond to those. Okay.
Thank you very much, Reverend Keith. At this time, I wish to have a question and answer session. If you have a question to Reverend Shibata or Reverend Inoue or both of them, please do so. And those who attend via Zoom, please unmute and express your questions.
The two of us too. So, Sensei, I'm curious, other things that the church might be doing to show outwardly what you are, to be able to make the individuals who identify as LGBTQ+ feel more welcoming. It's still a new venture for us.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to see what the response has been for your church.
Yeah. The San Jose Church and currently the West Los Angeles United Methodist Church, upon making a decision that we declare ourselves a reconciling United Methodist Church, I think it's so important for us to continue to celebrate that decision. So we have an annual celebration of that in worship, and we have folks share what the church means to them, and sometimes it's parents, sometimes it's persons who identify as LGBTQ+, But it's always a sermon that is really welcoming and inclusive. And so that's one thing that we do, besides also participating in a lot of the kinds of Okaidi events down here in Southern California that are really outstanding, I think, especially because it focuses on Asian American communities or Japanese American communities.
Can I ask a follow-up question too? Because I know even for the Pasadena Buddhist Church, they too had LGBTQ plus flag, and they were a victim of arson. If you had heard about that in the news. So a very tragic incident hitting home for us in the Buddhist Churches of America. And so what are some of the maybe concerns? Because, of course, we do want to be able to show that we're affirming and accepting, but then also the fear of other people's concerns, and actions against the affirming actions that we're trying to do.
That's a good question. I think every church, in making bold decisions about issues, oftentimes concerns itself with those kinds of fears. I know of a church in San Jose that declared themselves reconciling. Every time they put up a rainbow flag, it got stolen. So but it wasn't a violent act. It definitely was theft, and but I have seen that before, but not in the churches that I have experienced. I don't know, but we do worry about those things, sure. But I don't think we want to let it stop us be convicted in what we believe is right. So I think that's why many, it's not just this issue, but it's a whole lot of other things. That's why many churches have gates and security cameras and everything else. There's just a lot to be worried about. We're constantly having folks standing outside the sanctuary in the patio area in case someone violent comes in, right? So, and not just over this issue, but anything, right? So So we're a lot more vigilant in just the safety of our congregation overall. I think that's true for all faith communities. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. I want to say that one of the things that impressed me when I was at the Clovis Church was I got a newsletter from the Buddhist churches, and I think it had to do with the Boy Scout troops. And that was like one of the first articles that I had seen early on that said the Buddhist Boy Scout of America troops were, just really welcoming of boys and scout leaders, I think it was. And I thought, wow, that's really great. And so I thought that was fascinating to me. Yeah. So anyway. Yeah, was there a question?
So we have a question. Richard Ito? Oh, he just disappeared. He just unmuted himself and then okay, there was a question. But I don't know what.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, here he comes. He came back, so hold on one second. Let me, hi, Mr. Ito.
Bible mistranslation that changed America. And this is to do translation went in one direction, and it had tremendous impact because the Bible is not full of the topic. Apparently, it only hits the topic in one spot, and that spot everybody is, well, not everybody, but so many people are focusing on it, and for some reason feel that it's among the worst things that can happen. So I just wanted to bring that out and something for a follow-up. It's hard to discuss something if you haven't read it, but you might want to check it out. And I thought it was really interesting. And hopefully it's a seed of hope. That's all I have to say about that.
I hear what you're saying. Traditionalists or Christian conservatives will turn to certain passages in the Bible that support their thoughts on the subject. They're oftentimes referred to as the clobber passages. But theologians have also unpacked and interpreted those scriptures in a very different light, helping to explain the kind of social context and cultural context that those scripture passages actually come from. That really does make sense that, this is really not about sexual orientation, gender identity. It's more about violence. And so, there's a lot out there that is helpful that you can read. Does that convince everybody? And that's a difficult thing. Is what one person exegetes or interprets in Scripture might be so different from how someone else interprets it. So sometimes as much as it is important to understand and interpret Scripture, sometimes it's very difficult to argue, the interpretation with others. So for me, one of the things that I oftentimes convey to folks, not just on this subject, but on a whole lot of subjects, is, a lot of times we as Christians, we look at the Bible in different ways. Some will see the Scripture as a fence that defines the parameters of our belief, or others will see it as a stepping stone from which we do greater theologizing about the nature and the reality of God. And I'm certainly more inclined to look at Scripture as a stepping stone from which we continue to grow in our understanding of the divine of God. And so there's, like I said at the beginning of my sharing, there's a lot of growing that we still need to do, and our human minds continue to evolve and understand God in new ways that the generations before us didn't understand. And so I really think that's important to affirm. That Scripture is a stepping stone from which we continue to discover God. In the United Church of Christ, they used Gracie Allen's quote. She said something like, never place a period where God has put a comma. And that addresses that whole idea that God's not done speaking yet, or the divine is not finished revealing itself to us. We're constantly growing in our understanding of the nature of the divine, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense.
I think it makes a lot of sense. And that's why I brought up our article, because that type of thing starts the thinking process. And even if you don't agree with it, you guys start thinking, hey, wait a minute, isn't there more than one version of the Bible? How could that be? If it's so
What's that? Oh, no, it's actually a question for Reverend Keith, and this is a question out of my own ignorance. I come from the Buddhist background, and so my knowledge of Christianity is very limited to, the broad strokes. And so, from our Buddhist and especially Jodo Shinshu tradition, I think that one of our main, if we can call it practices, is the self-reflection of, we call them our afflictions or our blind passions that make us limited, and especially, so we look to, what we consider the absolute, the Buddha, to help understand ourselves, right? So it's not just about getting closer to the absolute, but it's a two-way kind of relationship, right? And I do know, well, I don't know, but my sense is that there are some Christian schools that is the approach. And so I'm just very not, so also from my understanding of Buddhism, all of our blind passions or afflictions or, faults or however we want to call that, some people, older translations do use the word sin, that were translated in the early 20th century, but regardless of what we call them, from my understanding of Jodo Shinshu is that they're all kind of equally bad. They're not like, this is horrible, but this is a little bit okay. Like, if, that the whole point is that we're not this perfect absolute thing. And so when you look at the big picture of everything, we look at our scale like this, but from the divine or the absolute side, that's like minuscule. So everything is equally wrong. Yeah. Or I don't want to say wrong, but equal value of not correct, not, perfectness. I don't know. Anyway, my point, the reason I want to bring this up is because I'm unfamiliar with how people, especially in the United Methodist school or denominations, how, like, the value of sin is treated and how or why somebody can say this sin is worse than this or behavior. And so this is just out of my ignorance. I just don't know. So I would appreciate if you could share a little bit of your understanding. Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you for your question. I hope I can answer it in an intelligent way. I agree with you. A lot of us Christians have a tendency to put a hierarchy as to which sins are worse than others. And it's usually your sin is lower than anybody else's sin, right? The way I lead membership class and understanding of basic Christianity at the churches that I've served is to understand. And I say that, but let me share this first, that my seminary education was at the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley, and that's a part of the Graduate Theological Union. So you're in class with all folks of all different Christian denominations and also the Buddhist Institute as well. In fact, I took a couple of classes at the Buddhist Institute during my seminary years. So I really appreciate that ecumenical kind of theological setting. I understand that the word sin, I oftentimes, if I'm understanding Buddhism correctly, sin is suffering. Dukkha, I believe that. Okay. So I think in many ways, so I oftentimes in the church help people to understand sin this way. I say in archery, when you do archery, the bullseye, of course, when you hit the target, it's a bullseye. Anything off target, off bullseye, is called a sin in archery, the sport of archery. And so I try to help people understand we're trying to be in sync with God, and anything that pulls us off center is sin. And I think that's kind of Buddhist too. I think in concept that anytime you're not going with the flow, you're kind of in a state of suffering. Is that correct? I think maybe. This is
Well, part of me feels like this kind of balance between extremes.
Yeah.
And being on this side or this side and maybe not in this middle path creates,
Middle path.
Oh, yeah. Some suffering.
Yes. So I think I try to explain sin in that way, and not so much as you pointed out. Sometimes we think, oh, this sin is worse than that sin, and we create that kind of valuation of acts of sin, right? And I think anything for us Christians, anything that feels like we're getting pulled out of alignment is a state of kind of sin.
I guess my question came out of your story about the
Yeah.
that has to be, like, what makes you feel that particular act was worse than any other, act of sin that you.
I think that's because it historically has been propagated by the church. I think that's why I thought it was so bad. They couldn't accept, that's who he was, attracted to persons of the same sex. Yeah, anyway. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. Oh, sorry, this is just another, what sets this is my own ignorance, what is the difference in the Methodist approach to, sin and God compared to other denominations? Yeah, I guess I just don't understand what the differences of the different denominations are. So what makes a Methodist in terms of your theological approach?
Yeah. To me, I think it's more a kind of approach to evangelism and outreach. I think some churches and denominations want to scare you into faith, right? Rather than inspire you in some kind of way. I'm as a pastor, I'm never about scaring people into faith. That if you don't become a Christian, you're going to hell. Kind of thing. I just don't. That's not me. But I think it is some others. Yeah. I mean, I shouldn't judge others, but it's a difference between reaching out because of grace and versus, just trying to get people to want to avoid some punishment, eternal punishment, right? Yeah. So,
There was something that I thought about that I failed to mention during Mr. Ito's question in regards to scripture and what it says either from Venerable Shinran's words or from the Buddha. Because I gave examples of we're all embraced in this light of Amida Buddha's wisdom and compassion. We're all embraced. It's fine. It's good. Well, so why do we need to even have these conversations about inclusivity if everybody from the Jodo Shinshu perspective is always embraced? And I appreciate this value of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism about all-encompassing embrace. However, the truth of the matter is not everybody feels like that in our temples. And sadly, I don't have any members who are out. And whether or not they do identify as LGBTQ+ in Stockton, I don't know of anybody who's out if they are. And so that makes me really question, if our doctrine is saying that everybody is embraced, why aren't people feeling that welcome spirit in my temple? And so I think that's been the most challenging for me. How do I continue to make steps and try to make strides and still not have folks feel comfortable or welcoming or safe? So it's a huge challenge for me, but one that I will continue to do. Because if it's not, actual members who identify as LGBTQ+, there might be family members or friends who support an individual in the Buddhist faith who do identify as LGBTQ+. So.
that I want to ask the question then, because I don't know. In most Buddhist, the Jodo Shinshu connection that you have, do most churches go through like a process of kind of discernment, so to speak, where you're talking about this issue and the church makes a decision that this is what we believe and this is who we are on this issue? Yeah.
More often than not, it seems like ideas and things that we're promoting, quote unquote, promoting or supporting happens to go through boards. We can never go through just working without boards in general. However, I think it does take, us in leadership who have the ability to be able to bring up these very important topics, to bring it to our board's attention and say, hey, let's question what our mission and vision is of this temple and make sure that it does align with Shinran's teachings or the Buddha's teachings, which does include this inclusivity and equity, this question about equity. So, and maybe, that's where my courage needs to come from too, to be able to bring these very difficult conversations or very challenging conversations to my board. Yeah, but I don't know if that's, generally speaking for all VCA boards or temples. Mm-hmm.
No, I get that, and I understand that. The churches that I have been a part of helping through this process, and please understand that not all the churches that I served that this was an easy task. In fact, there's a lot of pain that I still feel from experiences of trying to kind of process this out with churches. But in the church, several churches that I've served where we actually took a vote, we had a process of education. We invited people to share and talk, and we studied the issue and over almost the whole year. And with the understanding that at some point we were going to vote on this matter to see whether we were going to be affirm ourselves as a reconciling United Methodist congregation. But we said that we were going to, every time we had an event, we were going to take a straw vote that said, if we voted today, how would you vote? So it wasn't like vote now and then it was a done deal. It was, let's keep it going until we knew that we had a critical mass of the congregation that was on board with this decision. So we knew it was not just a board's decision or a few people's decisions, but it was really the majority of the whole church. And once we decided we were going to take that vote, we set the parameter of it had to be 80% or better. The truth of the matter is, in the San Jose church that I served, no one voted against. Only one person abstained. And so it was like 99-point-something% in favor of that. And I think that made all the difference in terms of helping people to understand this is okay to really talk this up and promote it and publicize and put, signage outside the church. And that was helpful for us. It may not work in every church, but that was helpful to us to kind of go with that strategy.
You kind of bring up two ideas that I can see how challenging how it can be, and possibly create a divide amongst members. But definitely how important it is to be able to continue to educate, not to try to sway somebody one way or another, but to really maybe allow an individual to question and really challenge their own beliefs, and to really maybe look at the scripture and see what it means and translate that in a way that does agree with being affirming and being reconciling. So yeah, luckily I feel that in Stockton I have been supported by my board. We're just continuing to make baby steps to see what exactly our needs are in Stockton and where to go from there. Especially after having not only one but two seminars through Ichimi of the Gardena Buddhist Church, and they've been a tremendous help and support too. Yeah.
I'm not on the panel, but can I add a thought to your answer? So, well, no. I wanted to ask your thought. Well, no, I'll turn it into a question then. So we do want to, open up education and like supporting a specific group of people that might be marginalized in society, but I'm asking kind of a rhetorical question, but like putting it out there, like for Amina Buddha to embrace all, then, how do we promote that we do include this this group that might be marginalized, but to include all means to also include the people that don't feel like this needs to be an issue that we tackle. I guess, how do you view that view of like embracing all? Yeah.
Maybe people who are having some pushback. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think for me that is the challenge, right? To be able to embrace everybody. Of course, I'm human, so it's difficult for me to do that too, because I have my own biases and thoughts and opinions about everybody probably that I meet. I'm not immune to that, but I also know that there are probably folks who probably are like, yeah, no, it's cool, you don't need to do anything. But I think what I do need to do is to advocate for those individuals who don't feel like they have a voice, to really say that, yeah, I respect your idea and your thoughts. However, individuals who feel marginalized don't have a voice. And as a minister, I feel like I have that, I don't want to privilege or that honor to be able to speak on their behalf based on what I know in the teachings, in the sutras, and what I know of Amida Buddha's embracing wisdom and compassion. But did you have a thought? I would love to hear your thought too.
I hear your question, and it reminded me of, just weeks ago I was watching another United Methodist pastor talk about this very kind of similar thing, and it was regarding, she had this kind of safe place for certain individuals, but she knew that this one person was coming to really kind of make it difficult. And what she said to that person, this pastor said, you're welcome to come, but if you're going to be hurtful to other people, then please don't. That's how she addressed that. And I thought, wow, this is not Japanese American. This is, so I don't know, culturally, if that's easy for us to do. But yeah, I thought, well, there's wisdom there. I don't want people to be hurtful to other people, But I do want to express that everyone's welcome. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any other question, comments?
Yeah, I think it's important that we start this conversation. I mean, it's long overdue, but my thoughts of it is not so much people coming out so much, but the congregation itself changing and learning within to be able to accept and making that person be able to come out. Because I think many people who have, even I work with a lot of disabled, they won't even tell people what their disabilities are because of the fear of being rejected or being, talked about, or, and I think that's part of the fear of a lot of the older members of our, they just don't have the exposure or the experience to really understand how to make those people, or any kind of person that is a little different, accepted within. So I just appreciate you guys coming and discussing it, because I've learned a lot about the United Methodist, and I've lived next to it for 50 years. So, and I know a lot of your members because I grew up with them. So,
and I think maybe for us too in Stockton, because we still primarily are Japanese American, that we kind of have to look at not only the temple culture, but even possibly the Japanese American culture of not about shame and not bringing shame to families and not discussing your personal business with everybody in Masanga. And so maybe it is a challenge for us to kind of break some of those, cultural traumas or cultural expectations on us, so that we can have these very important conversations that are necessary to continue to educate everybody, including myself, so that this welcoming nature that we want to have actually does come out. Because I think, Cynthia, you were talking too about, and I don't want to misquote, but actually having like actions behind our words, and very thoughtful action behind just words. Not saying, hey, we're affirming, we're reconciling, we're welcoming, but actually having that action behind it to show that, yeah, we really are walking in the right direction to create that space. Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. Are you okay, Arisa?
Actually, with that action you just talked about, like, what do you exactly do you think the action that you guys need to show or take?
Personally, I felt like I need to take like kind of baby steps because I'm still learning too. And even just stating my pronouns. I identify as she, her, hers. Hi, I'm Candace Shibata. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And that came like out of practice. It doesn't roll off my tongue easily, and it's something that I try to do. Maybe it's a very small step, but for one of my parents, it was a huge step to be able to hear a minister state their pronouns, because it made her feel as a parent that I was affirming in that sense of those folks who identify as they, them, theirs. And she said, I really appreciate that you do that. So it might seem very small, but I think I didn't imagine what a big impact it would have. Or possibly, continuing to host events or educational seminars to our members. So for me, it might be, it might seem kind of small, but I'm hoping that these small steps really make big steps in the long run. And to be honest, I think it is just a matter of me just saying, like, yeah, I'm still learning too. So let's walk on this path of learning together. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had another question, but now I don't remember what it was. It had to do with something Reverend Keith said earlier about. Oh shoot, I don't remember. Okay, hold on. You guys move on, and I'll think about it. Okay. Oh, I remember. Okay, so I wanted to get. So Reverend Keith, I appreciated a comment that you made about. Sometimes people will come in and hear one off-color comment by one person, and then they think that represents the view of the whole church. So what are both of your views on how we can encourage people to understand that one person's comment does not reflect the view of the teaching itself or the doctrine itself, Because all of us say stupid things sometimes without realizing we're hurting somebody. I was just curious what your thoughts are on actions that we can take, building off of actions, how we can encourage people to understand that aspect too.
Go ahead.
I think trying to address it right away is really important. However, in the JA community, sometimes folks you don't see them ever again, right? So they're not so open about what someone said to them until maybe years later, and you found out, oh, that was why that they never came back. But I do think that's why a lot of the church or temple publicity needs to be really as prevalent as someone's off point comment, right? So I don't know, trying to I think part of it in the Christian church, in worship service, we oftentimes say that we are a reconciling church and kind of unpack what that means so that everybody is reminded of that and what that means. I think that does a lot to help kind of guide people in their conversations. But, we all, like you said, we all say things that, I shouldn't have said that, or you just don't know, right? You don't understand, and you're growing, you're learning, and so sometimes you don't realize you've been insensitive to someone else, and we just need to kind of teach each other. But I don't know.
Sorry for your answer, but I wanted to kind of have. I've heard some people.
Sorry, Reverend Candace, I'm sorry, before your answer, I just wanted to couch my question in the context of what I was thinking. And I've heard some people, members, say, oh my gosh, pronouns, why do I have to do that? And then they complain, right? Because that's not in their habits or they don't understand it. But then there are some people where pronouns are important to them, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, because that one person complained about using pronouns, the whole church doesn't accept me, and it's like, no, just because that one person, and that's where, accepting all people means if somebody doesn't want to say their pronouns, that person's still accepted, just because that makes them uncomfortable. So anyway, that's where my question comes from, is just like helping all of us understand our own proclivities. That doesn't necessarily it's not personal to other people, and I don't know. Sorry, that's just the context of what I was thinking too. Thank you.
Sure. I was kind of thinking, like, what would I do? But I think Reverend Keith kind of brought up a good point too. Like, you continuously keep bringing it up, because I mentioned culture. That maybe this is the culture of our temple. We say pronouns here. And I know not everybody does, but when I started, putting my name on my Zoom little box, I put Reverend Candace Shibata, she, her, hers, and how elated I was to see my board members follow suit. And maybe the public, they don't see that on our board meeting Zoom, but I was just happy that they were in tune with that and how much it mattered. And perhaps, like, say, for example, if somebody misgenders somebody, or even if I do that, if I refer to a friend as she and they identify as they, then I just, real quick, I need to correct myself in front of that person quickly, to acknowledge that I caught myself and I apologize, and, to acknowledge that they exist and their identity matters to me. And for an individual that said, and I've heard this before, that whole they, them pronoun thing, it doesn't make sense to me because it seems like a plural. But, say if I called you Ken instead of Keith, that's not your name, and how hurtful that might be to that individual. And maybe just kind of put it into context. Like, you want to be seen as you, uniquely you. And if I keep calling you Ken, I don't respect that, And maybe it is just a mishap on my part. My hearing is bad or something. But if I show that I can, take a step back and apologize right then and there. Because there was an instance in my other smaller temple that I didn't correct a behavior, and I still regret it. Because I still wonder how hurtful it was to this other individual. When, they were inquiring, is that a boy or a girl? And I didn't step in. So I'll be probably perseverating on that for the next 10 years of my life, or my whole life, So.
I'm making my confession here. Candace introduced herself with her pronouns, and as she was saying that, I thought to myself, oh, I need to introduce myself with my pronouns again. It got to me, and I didn't do that. and I'm realizing that, for younger people, that just kind of part of their, they're used to that. For me, gosh, I got to constantly remind myself, and it's usually after everybody, like 5 people before me have introduced themselves with their pronouns, and okay, now I got it down. I know what I got to do, right? But so on my Zoom thing, I definitely have he, him, his on there, but I forget all the time. It's still not ingrained in me enough. Yeah, but yeah.
I guess I've never gotten any lessons or instructions on the purpose or how you use it or anything like that. All of a sudden, I see it here and there, and it's new to me. I don't know how to use it. I don't know its meaning, and I think my point is part of the problem is education, and the other one is change. Change happens, but on the other hand, change happens with cost too. It's not something that just flows along, like a easy river. It is something that you learn and you bounce along. So all of a sudden, if you've got some new term, or where people use shortcuts for text, and then I got to look at it and go, wow, what is that? So I think just talking about it, or maybe a little lesson in the newsletter or something like that, I think that would be helpful too, because this is not something that I focus on. I don't worry about if somebody is male or female or anything in between or outside of that range. It's a person, and some people want to be identified, some people don't, but I don't worry about it. So for me, it's another thought I gotta think about and do, and that's hopefully that helps answer your question, Irvin.
I think, more kind of educational opportunities we have in our temples and churches, the better. I do recall at the San Jose church, I think someone did share what that was all about, using your pronouns, and then we had these little stickers to put on the corner of your name tag what your pronouns were. So that was helpful to visibly see what people wanted to be called or referred to, right? So, yeah.
That's great. I think idea to be able to put it in the newsletter, like another educational opportunity to be able to educate our members. And actually, name tags have been something I've been wanting to do. I think we kind of maybe just take for granted that we believe that we just know each other because we all go to the same temple or church, and that is definitely not the case. So even, small actions, they might seem very small, like have a name tag with your pronouns, but, to be seen, I think it's a huge impact too, Yeah. So, thank you. I think I'll do a newsletter article. Or have my concluded committee do a newsletter article.
Can I borrow yours?
Of course. But I will be borrowing it from this resource guide. Here's a plug for the Ichi-ni resource guide. So I'll probably be leaning on this too. But, yeah.
Thank you very much for your attendance and all of your questions. I especially would like to extend my appreciation to Reverend Keith, Reverend Candice, for sharing your experience and the point of view of your faith and belief. Thank you very much. So this concludes the Interfaith Seminar of Inclusiveness. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you. Thank you very much.